everyone, Roxanne here from FinanceRocks.com. Today I wanted to share the 5 types of emergency funds that I keep and recommend. I get asked a lot what types of emergency funds people should keep, and I will share these are the 5 that I use, but I do recommend customizing them to, your own scenarios and what types of emergencies you're most likely to encounter. This video is for you if you are reevaluating the types of emergency funds that you want to keep, or if you are new to saving emergency funds and are trying to decide how to structure your funds. If you only take away one thing from this emergency fund series, I hope it's this. Put more why behind your emergency funds. I like to think of emergency funds just like goals. Every goal that you have should have a powerful why behind it. And by why, I mean purpose or reason behind. Having a powerful why behind your goal is going to help you stay motivated to keep taking action towards that goal. And the same thing is true with saving an emergency fund. If you have powerful why statements behind them, it's going to help you both with saving the emergency fund. It's going to keep you motivated to, keep setting aside money, keep cutting back expenses, keep working harder to save more. And it's also going to help you keep that emergency fund once you have it. There are always times where we're tempted to access our emergency funds for non-emergency situations. So having a powerful why behind it is going to pop into your head and remind you to keep that money. Now, the most common emergency funds that I hear financial experts recommend are the $1,000 emergency fund and the 3 to 6 months of expenses emergency fund. I do have a little bit of a beef with the $1,000 emergency fund. Find that the $1,000 emergency fund is kind of arbitrary and a little bit uninspiring. If you watched my last video, you might be thinking, oh, I'm pretty sure I remember you saying that you did have a $1,000 starter emergency fund. But let me explain. When I was broke and unemployed, I sat down and thought about what kinds of emergencies am I most likely to face and how much are those emergencies likely to cost. What I came up with at the time was that I wanted to have $950 set aside in case I needed to go to Seattle for a family medical emergency. Now, I did get very specific with this. I thought, my brothers like to skateboard a lot, they like to snowboard. If one of them ever had an injury from that, I'd want to be prepared. It seems like a lot of medical emergencies got escalated to Seattle if they were very serious. So I thought about how much it would cost to get to Seattle and then factored in costs for hotel and food. So it was a very specific scenario that I said I'm always going to have money set aside for this. I also went about outlining the types of things that I would be able to spend that money on and the types of things I would not be able to spend that money on. So this applied to myself and my immediate family, siblings and parents only. Now, I did take that $950 and round it up to $1,000 for the sake of easy tracking and calculating when I looked at my bank account so that I knew how much I would have set aside. It's just a little easier to do the math. So while I did technically have a $1,000 emergency fund, it wasn't just that I said, oh, I want $1,000. It was for these specific scenarios, that's how much I would need to cover this type of emergency. Thinking about my little brother being injured really did help me to stay on task when I was trying to save up my emergency fund. There were times that I wanted to kind of relax the rules that I had set for myself, maybe not go as extreme with saving money. So that definitely helped me to save that money. And instead of just saying, I want to have $1,000 and having that be arbitrary. One of the big problems with money is that it's intangible and abstract. So I think that causes a lot of people difficulty when they're trying to save because, we don't really see our money going in and out of our accounts. It's a little bit hard to kind of visualize the money. So having a specific example really helped me to save the emergency fund. And then since I saved it, it really helped me to keep that emergency fund because that specific scenario would pop into my mind if I thought about accessing that money for scenarios that weren't necessarily emergencies. So let's talk about the 5 types of funds that I keep. A death fund, a job loss fund, common shortages fund, a minimum balance fund, and a paper cash fund. So the death fund is the fund that I started with first, and I apologize that this is a little bit grim, and I understand that not everyone wants to think about, serious emergencies happening to them and their family members, but like to think of this fund as the fund that I would use to prevent my own death. So if, I'm at the end, all the other money is spent, all my assets are depleted, this is money that is going to help me buy food or pay for medical expenses. It is for death or critical illness of my immediate family members. So I'm talking about parents and siblings only. And then the other purpose that I have behind this fund is if I never end up spending it, which hoping not to, is to cover some of my end-of-life care or funeral costs so that my family doesn't have to be as burdened. So I will say this, that I am ultimately an optimist, really, I am. I don't generally assume that more than one bad scenario is going to happen at a time. So I do have multiple purposes behind each emergency fund. And I think that's okay, saying that these are the things that I will spend it on. As long as those things are specific so that you're not like, oh, okay, well, I need money, so I'm just going to use this fund. The second type of fund I keep is the job loss fund. Now this one I generally do calculate using the 3 to 6 months type of formula. And I do consider this to be a backup to the death fund. So kind of loosening the restrictions on that. This would include serious medical issues for my immediate family, extended family, and then close friends. So any scenario that would generally cause extended unemployment are scenarios where I could access this money. The third is a common shortage fund. So this is money that I can access freely if I need to for car repairs, car replacement, unexpected expenses. Now, I don't like to consider car breakdowns as emergencies because we all know that vehicles don't last forever. So I consider it my responsibility to make sure that I am setting aside money for my next vehicle while I am driving my current vehicle. And it doesn't have to be a full replacement fund. It can be a couple $1,000s so that you could buy a beater car if you needed to short-term, interim fix. You could also, after you hit that number, maybe scale it up to say, this is the amount of money that I'd want to have for a down payment on my next car. I would also use this fund to pay for unexpected things that came up. So, for example, a $2,000 dentist bill, which I have had, thanks cavities, or to pay just large bills that come up that I'd prefer to pay like in advance. So this is money that I could use to pay like a year's worth of car insurance. So that way I get the better rate on the car insurance compared to paying on a month-to-month basis. So kind of just an excess fund for day-to-day things as well as those longer-term purposes. The fourth type of fund I have is a minimum balance fund. So this is a much smaller fund. It's a small amount of money that I keep in my checking account to help prevent against cash shortages, bouncing checks, and overdraft fees. How I calculate this fund has varied over the years. It started with like just $100 at the bottom of my checking account that would always be that little buffer between regular day-to-day money and those emergency funds. And then it has varied and increased over the years to being about 1 month worth of expenses. Having 1 month of expenses set aside makes it so that we don't have to fuss around with weekly budgeting, having to cut a check and having to worry about needing to transfer money from savings to checking. It just makes managing money a lot easier and is that little bit of extra buffer for needing to access those other emergency funds. The fifth type of fund I keep is a paper cash fund. This is just paper cash that we keep in a little home safe that we have. We keep it for basically power outage situations or identity theft, whatever kind of scenarios that would prevent us from accessing our money with our debit card or using credit cards. Kind of alluded to this, but just to clarify, I do think of these funds as additional layers of protection for each other. So it kind of is like emergency fund for your emergency fund for your emergency fund, which I know might seem excessive if you've only ever kept one fund and kept everything lumped together. But this really is where I think I've had the benefit of the peace of mind that comes from having the emergency fund. If thinking about these 5 types of funds is making you feel overwhelmed, I would recommend, just starting with one type of fund, building that up, and then moving on to the other ones, which is exactly what I did. I started with my $950 death fund, and then once I hit that and filled that, then I moved on to other types of funds. You don't have to build it all at once. Now, I do recommend customizing the types of funds that you keep and obviously putting your own whys behind those. I've thought before about keeping like a clumsy fund. If you end up having like medical expenses a lot, having a separate fund for that might be beneficial to you. Also, there are other things that might cause you to need separate additional funds. Like if you are a homeowner and you own an older house that has high repair costs, maybe having a separate fund for that would help you to cover those scenarios as they come up. So that's all I have for you today, just those 5 types of emergency funds: death fund, job loss, common shortage, minimum balance, and paper cash. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. And I'd be interested to hear what your whys are behind each of what your whys are for each of your emergency funds, and if you keep multiple or if you keep them combined. That's all for today. Until next time, I hope your emergency funds rock.